Hello everybody, it's Shrouded Hand here. There's been a lot of stuff in the news recently about crashed UFOs and recovered alien remains. There's just been a US congressional hearing on UFOs, which is either the beginnings of some huge disclosure event or some attempt to distract us from something else that's going on. I guess if you're watching this in the future, then you'll already know which it is. Anyway, with all this talk about non-human biologics, I thought I'd look at a strange case from Russia that happened in the mid-90s. Nestled in the secluded forests of Kishtim, in the heart of rural Russia, a strange discovery sent shockwaves through the world of ufology and captured the imaginations of millions of people. This is the story of Alyoshenka, Russia's alien baby. The story of Alyoshenka took place in a village that's so obscure that I can't even find a guide on how to pronounce it on Google, so I'm gonna call it Kaulinovi, but it's probably wrong. Kaulinovi is a village that's so small that the best chance of locating it is via its nearest major township, that of Kishtim in Chelyabinsk Oblast. It's around 1,750 kilometers east of Moscow, towards the border of Kazakhstan. It has an extremely low population level and all the poverty and challenges that come with living that remotely. Not much interesting happened in the village of Kaulinovi until the discovery of Alyoshenka. The Alyoshenka baby is a small humanoid figure that was discovered in May 1996 by a local elderly lady or babushka. It's described as being around 25 centimeters or nearly 10 inches in length. The eyes of Alyoshenka occupied a proportionally larger section of the face than would have been expected in a human. There were strange ridges of bone protruding from the skull in unusual patterns. Now, there's a few different stories about how Alyoshenka was discovered. Some versions of the story are more sensible than others, but sensible doesn't always mean it's true, so I'll just tell you what I found and you can make up your own mind. In the first version of the story, a woman named Tamara Vasilievna Prosverina was a local elderly woman who was seen walking down the street one day with a blanket in her arms. She was behaving as though there was a baby in there. The other villagers didn't get a glimpse of what was inside the blankets, but they reported that Tamara referred to it as Alyoshenka, her baby, and she said that she'd found it by a well in the woods nearby. Later, these same neighbours called the authorities and Tamara was taken away to an asylum. Whilst she was away, her home was rented to a man named Vladimir Nerdanov. He discovered Alyoshenka's body in the house. It was a small humanoid creature with a large, oddly shaped head. He was obviously shocked and he hid the body in the garage. Sometime later, Vladimir was arrested for stealing electrical cables, and whilst he was being questioned by police, he told them to go and check in the garage because there was something strange hidden there. This is when the desiccated body of Alyoshenka was discovered by the authorities and made public. In the second version of the story, the same Tamara Prosverina would go every day to the local cemetery and pick flowers. One day after returning home from the cemetery and getting ready for bed, she began to receive a psychic message in her head telling her to go back to the cemetery. She picked up a torch and went back there in the dark. She felt drawn to a particular gravestone. Standing in front of the grave was a small humanoid creature that emitted a low whistling noise to gain her attention. She took the creature home and she fed it on milk and caramel sweets and named it Alyoshenka. Over the next few days, the neighbours noticed Tamara caring for what looked like a baby through her window. They called the authorities and Tamara was taken away to a mental asylum. While she was gone, Alyoshenka was left in the house alone and died of starvation. The body was later found when police searched the house. Now, I know the second version doesn't sound too convincing, but there is a strange testimony from Tamara's daughter-in-law. She apparently visited the house and saw Alyoshenka alive just before Tamara was taken away. She said, "I used to visit my mother-in-law twice a week. She was living on her own. One day I bought food for her, as I always did. As I was leaving, she said to me, 'Can you give some food for the baby too?' And then she showed me the bed, and I got closer and I saw it. She was on top of the bed, squeaking some funny sounds. Her mouth looked like a small tube with a tiny red tongue moving about. She had 2 stained teeth inside. Somehow she looked like a little baby. Her head was brown and her body was grey. It had no eyelids and no genitals either. The head looked like an onion. The pupils in her eyes were as wild as a cat's, and they lit up in the dark. The fingers of the hands were long. I asked my mother-in-law where she got that monster from. She said that she'd found her in the woods. She called it Alyoshenka and fed it sweets, which the creature eagerly sucked. To me, it looked like some kind of animal." So, whichever version of events is true, it seems there definitely was a woman called Tamara, and she did find something that didn't look quite human. It seems that she suffered from schizophrenia and she was committed to a mental institution not long after finding Alyoshenka. Unfortunately, Tamara was killed in an accident in 1999 while she was trying to flee from custody. Locals reported that she was seen dancing on the highway moments before being hit by a truck. Apparently, she was killed days before a team of Japanese researchers were to arrive in the village and question her. Apparently also the road she was dancing on hardly ever had any traffic on it, so questions have been raised about how she could have been hit by a truck. I don't really know if there's anything suspicious about her death or if it's just bad timing. She did die 3 years after the body was found, so if she was killed to keep her from speaking, it seems odd that they would wait so long to do it. So we don't have our key witness, and that leaves us with only the primary evidence, the physical remains of Alyoshenka, also the testimony of villagers who say they were there. You would imagine that this would make uncovering the truth easy, but in fact it does quite the opposite. Some locals describe Alyoshenka as being hairy, others say she was hairless. Some say that she had blue eyes, some say dark eyes. Some say that she was already dead when Tamara discovered her, some say that she was still alive. Given all the time that's passed since the discovery of Alyoshenka and all these conflicting reports, it's pretty difficult to get a clear version of events. As for the physical remains of Alyoshenka, that's even more of a problem. Some reports state that the remains were retained and examined by some medical personnel. The local police chief wasn't interested, so an investigator by the name of Vladimir Bendlin took the only efforts to preserve the remains and try and work out what Alyoshenka was. He wrapped the remains up and kept them in his fridge, but at some point the remains went missing and nobody seems to know where they are. Before Alyoshenka vanished, her remains were brought to a ufologist who, with the help of a forensic expert, ran a number of tests. They determined that Alyoshenka was the mummified corpse of a severely deformed child born many weeks premature. However, around the same time, a clinical expert on birth defects named Lyubov Romanova examined Alyoshenka. She claims that she had never seen anything like it and that the body was not of human origin. Local people also had their own opinions on what Alyoshenka was. Theories range between her being some kind of dwarf, elf-like creature, a demon, an alien, or just a human. A local UFO enthusiast claims that an alien vessel arrived and secured the remains to take her back home. A UFO investigation group called Cosmoposk, or Space Search, dedicated a number of expeditions to the area in 2002. They spoke a lot to the local residents. They were told local legends about a tiny race of humanoid creatures that lived in caves under the woods where Alyoshenka was found. Supposedly this team also found a UFO landing site nearby, although I don't know how you would identify a UFO landing site. And on a side note, this same group returned to the area in 2015 and built a monument to Alyoshenka. So, as you can imagine, with all this speculation and rumour, it's pretty difficult to get to the truth of the matter. However, if we go with the idea that Alyoshenka was just a severely deformed human, then there may be something in that region's past that would account for such birth defects. You see, the village of Kalyanovi was in a fairly close proximity to the Kishtim disaster. This was a radioactive contamination event that occurred in 1957. It resulted in the evacuation of around 10,000 people, which is a fraction of how many people were evacuated for both Chernobyl and Fukushima, and they were somewhat less urgent about it. Procedures were a lot more lax at the time, and the facility had been dumping its radioactive waste into the local river for a number of years prior to the incident. What happened in 1957 is that an underground tank containing radioactive material exploded, poisoning thousands of square kilometres of land around the site. Add in the fact that the only water source for the people in the local area, and even further downstream, had already been contaminated to levels deemed dangerous for humans. They had no alternative source of water, and so they were all unknowingly drinking it, showering in it, and using it to wash their clothes. When the authorities finally got around to starting to evacuate people, it had already been a week since the explosion, and the reasons they gave for moving people away were extremely vague and non-specific, so a lot of people stayed put because they didn't know the danger. Only the Chernobyl disaster ranks higher than it in terms of lives affected and radiation released, but it's not an event that's remembered much in the public consciousness. It didn't have nearly as much international effect as Chernobyl did, and in 1957, informing the world about a nuclear mishap probably wasn't on the top of the agenda for the powers that be within Russia. So, could this massive leak of radioactive matter into the area in 1957 account for such deformities as those seen in Alyoshenka in 1996? That's probably the leading, most down-to-earth theory, but as I said before, the most sensible answer doesn't always mean the most true answer. Alyoshenka could be a deformed, premature baby, or it could be an alien creature visiting our planet, or it could be some kind of gnome creature that inhabits the caves beneath Kalyanovi. I think the paranormal explanations are less disturbing than the skeptical ones. If it was simply a deformed human being, then that means somebody gave birth to Alyoshenka and dumped her either in the woods or in a graveyard. She was then found by a local babushka who, probably suffering from schizophrenia, took her home and cared for her as if she was her own baby. In this scenario, the child would most likely have already been dead by the time Tamara found her. Although that doesn't account for the sister-in-law's testimony that she'd seen Alyoshenka alive and moving around. So who knows, it's one of those mysteries that probably won't ever get a satisfactory explanation, but that's the story of Alyoshenka, and I hope you found it interesting. I was going to shill my merchandise at the end of this video, but now I'm kind of wondering how I transition from dead alien babies to a merch plug without seeming coarse. Do you want to look out of this world? No. Here's some cool t-shirts and things. All the designs were drawn by me. Check it out. It helps support the channel, helps me make new videos. And speaking of supporting the channel, a huge thanks to the patrons. Your continued support is a massive help, so thank you to all of you. Thanks for watching. If you want more content, check out my other videos or my gaming channel. I upload there quite regularly. I also stream on Twitch most days, so I might see you there. Until next time, goodbye.